when you have your own team doing any sort of QA or validating what you've built, they're coming at it with certain biases, and they're also probably physically in one location. So you've got a QA lab that's in one place, and maybe they have, a couple iPhones or Android devices, but they're not really looking at it through all of the other layers that separate you from the real customers.
You're listening to 15-Minute Mastery, a show that empowers you with insights from leading iGaming experts to enhance your personal or business performance. The show is brought to you by the AI-powered data analytics platform Blask and supported by tech-driven affiliate and media company Already Media, Lala Stars, the leading casino partnership program, and Next.io, the world's iGaming community. Hey guys, and welcome to this episode of 15 Minutes Mastery. We got Kyle, a CEO at TESTA, and TESTA is the worldwide quality testing service built specially for iGaming. TESTA helps iGaming businesses to improve their software quality, to reduce time to market, and uncover things about the places they operate. To be honest, Kyle probably is one of the world's leading experts in product development and infrastructure, and probably the only person iGaming who loudly speaks about the importance of product localization, speed, and exploring the way how your product can look better in the eyes of the target audience on ground. Hey Kyle, it's so nice to have you here, and I cannot wait to have a chat with you about all these cool topics we've outlined for this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Dimitri. That's quite the introduction, and looking forward to the conversation as well.
So what inspired you to create, this kind of specialized QA and testing platform for iGaming industry? And what kind of, key principles you focused during the, its inception stage?
So we founded TESTA because we always did a lot of testing in our technology business. So to take you back about 6-7 years, we launched a company called Gigantech based out of Taiwan, mostly focused on iGaming providers and operators in Asia. And what Gigantech did was it really focused on some of those localization issues you discussed, making sure games were performant and fast, security, uptime, all these very unique technical challenges that the industry sees in Asia that they may not see in other markets. So as we were going along with these projects and, making improvements, what we found is really important is, one, we need to tell our clients what things looked like before we started working with them, what they looked like in comparison to their competitors, and then what it looked like after we were working for them. So we always had a ton of data and testing from within the markets, both with real people and some synthetic tools, but we found that the real people ended up kind of serving a need that was undiscovered. We would often finish our kind of projects, deliver the improvements. Then our clients would say, hey, that was, really interesting. You had a person on the ground in whatever, Thailand. How about Japan? How about Malaysia? How about India? And eventually, when enough people requested this, the light bulb went off, and we saw there was an opportunity for a business into of itself with crowd testing.
This is a really cool concept, and to be honest, we were doing this a lot ourselves in previous companies, but we never had someone doing this for us. And can you explain the real benefits of using the crowdsource approach for QA and testing, especially in iGaming, and how it's compared to traditional methods?
So the main benefit is that when you have your own team doing any sort of QA or validating what you've built, they're coming at it with certain biases, and they're also probably physically in one location. So you've got a QA lab that's in one place, and maybe they have, a couple iPhones or Android devices, but they're not really looking at it through all of the other layers that separate you from the real customers. That could be the internet service providers they're using. It could be very different types of devices. It could be physical distance. So, spinning a slot reel when the server is, a 1 hour flight away, it's very different than 14, 15, 16 hours away. At a certain point, the speed of light actually becomes a consideration, and how far are you sending that data? How fast is the bandwidth between these locations? All these things you're kind of flying blind on unless you can actually get information from within those markets. If you extend that a little further, you start looking at your partnerships. You look at payment providers or content providers or various sorts of plugins and widgets you've got in the site. And if those things aren't optimized for the region, then they're going to pull you down as well. So even if you've done your job, perhaps your vendors and all the people that you depend on haven't done a very good job, and that's going to cause issues. So there's all sorts of details that get lost when you're looking at kind of a homogenous team that's testing quality, and they're just far away from the market, both physically and sometimes in terms of language, culture, infrastructure, devices, what have you.
So you mentioned quite a few like aspects of performance and especially the user compatibility. I remember that, you know, in one of the studies we've done previously in one of my companies, we've realized even the brightness of the sun and the colors inside of the products were one of the most critical elements because the users couldn't see certain elements. And, you know, this leads me to like a thought on like your experience in particular. So what kind of like a critical aspects of performance and maybe like compatibility testing you guys like seen, you know, like in the companies you worked with, in the markets you kind of tested, like if you can name like the top 5 most critical aspects of performance and compatibility testing you've seen.
Speed's obviously a big one. I mean, I think there's a famous Google study for every extra 100 milliseconds on a page, the bounce rate goes up by a certain amount. So speed for especially the operator's sites, just how fast the pages are loading and key processes when people are searching for games, doing a first time deposit. So that's very important. Device compatibility is huge. So if you are looking at a market that maybe has, they're a bit mid-tier or it's kind of the lower income segment of the country, sometimes you can be looking at a $150, $100 Android device. We had a client come to us with, a real headache where they were a provider and they had a client of theirs complaining that a game was extremely slow. They had tested this to, their wits end with all these tools and all these things, and it took them months and months and months. And they eventually came to realize was the provider had somebody with just really low end Android devices. And it was a very nice slot game. It had lots of WebGL and JavaScript and fancy things. And it was simply the processing power of the phone. So even if you've built the software well and there's, a great CDN and servers are nearby and all these things, if you're not looking at it through the local lens and understanding, well, what kind of devices are they using to actually load these games, uh, things can hurt, right? You get into things like device heat and everything that can follow from that. If the phone's working too hard, it gets hot. That's something unpleasant users will note. So that's a big one. In terms of other issues, live video is very challenging. Again, it's streamed from one location. Same with live odds. So you're often looking at making quick decisions. Say a live dealer video, it needs to sync up with the actual event that's happening in the studio. You can't replicate the studio to a different location. It's either in Asia or in Europe, and that video feed is going to travel with a certain amount of delay. So what happens in the video needs to match in what happens on the game screen. Slot reels turning are similar. If, we've seen issues where somebody's in Asia or Latin America and their game server is still in the UK or Germany or whatever. For every slot reel spin, if you're adding 100, 200 milliseconds of latency just due to distance, compound this over millions of spins, and you're talking about a major, major, change to your turnover each month. So all of these things kind of compound. I've mostly talked about providers, but on the operator side, I mean, obviously the payment methods are a huge, huge thing. That's kind of the number one thing operators come to us with. It's just, can we validate that payments actually work in this market? And sometimes even if payments work, it's more about getting into the details. I mean, the PSP will tell you, okay, we got this code, it's approved, but what does that look like with real money? What does it look like when you take, say, 25 euros, bring it right through the system? What does it show up on the bank statement as? How long does it take to clear? These are all things that you may not see until you've actually taken money from end to end. I guess the last thing I'll add is just kind of general UX and exploratory, and languages are huge. Often, when people go into more distant markets, they use translation houses that translate things, and they may get the terms wrong. They may not be casino related. They may be missing some of the marketing speak from the terms, so they may be using words that aren't very friendly to UX. Like, in English, we'll often say join instead of sign up, or get this instead of do this work, right? And you can make all those mistakes in other languages, and all these things they compound, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And while you were giving me this list, I was thinking about the possible user persona. Like you were mentioning operators, you were mentioning, like game providers, payment providers. I think, your approach towards crowdsource QA is actually has so much more in depth in the industry, and I think not many companies and people understand the importance of it. So yeah, it's really cool that you've highlighted some of those. And it actually led me to the next point, which I really wanted to hear your thoughts about. Like, so you were mentioning markets a lot, and I was wondering like how the market research and benchmark it, on the market in general can be utilized by operators specifically to stay competitive, and what kind of insights they can take away from these benchmarks, and how they can implement them in the strategies essentially.
So, two things. The most obvious, and where we get a lot of the requests are when entering a new market. So, say you've got a tool like Blask or something similar where okay, I'm going into this market. These are the top five, the top 10 people. Um, if I tell you in just kind of a silo, Dimitri, this game takes 12 seconds to load and your registration process took 30 seconds, and that's all very interesting numbers. But those numbers on their own don't mean that much. If you are able to have somebody in the market that can look at these top 5 or 10 competitors and then show where you are at, that is very, very interesting, because the question is, what does this market look like? What is competitive? What is like the good experience? And then how do you stack up? Are you ahead? Are you behind? What's the delta between all these things? So I think that's kind of the key in where we come in for entering a new market. It's, take a look at these top guys by GGR, by brand recognition, whatever. How fast do they load? How seamless are these processes? What kind of games, promotions, payment channels, whatever do they have? And that's kind of the work we did historically and what launched Testa. It was that we would always start with the data. We would start saying, this is how things are today. With time, this gap should close and you should surpass things. We had, some of our largest clients say, this is who we're targeting. We want to be on track with them. So that's kind of the thinking. And I mean, aside from new markets, I think what people often forget is once you've gained share in a market, are you keeping an eye on it? Are you making sure nobody else is coming up on your heels? Who has come in and what kind of product are they offering? So that's also key. It's taking a look at who's gaining share and how do they stack up against you. So Testa doesn't do kind of really large macro market research, but what we can do is we can say, okay, you know what's important and where you're going and what you're investing and who you're competing with. Now, how do you stack up against those people, right? We can't necessarily solve the issues either. When possible, we can, give comments and insights because we know iGaming so well. But the key is we can say, this is, where you want to be. This is where you are. These are the gaps between them. This is all based on real people with real phones, real computers, in the target market trying your products out. So that's our goal.
This is a major issue, especially in the young markets where, one operator, whether it's local or, like from somewhere from Europe, entered these markets like 10 years ago, had this like a huge market share, and then new market entrants enter in, buying like a small chunks, and then the bigger chunks of your market shares. And like as you said, like you really need to understand what these guys are doing in terms of their products, their like approaches, their speed of load, like speed of withdrawal, like as you mentioned, because I think essentially the speed of withdrawal, like as you mentioned, could be one of the most like all-time most important factors, within like any operator within any market. So I'm really happy to have you here, Kyle. I think the insights you mentioned are really important for operators, and even like as we discovered any other companies in iGaming to be considered while performing their work in a certain markets. So thank you so much for all these insights you shared. It was really a pleasure to have you here.
Likewise, Dimitri. Thanks so much for having me on.